I know you have been with CGTN actually today, the whole day, with a focus on the government worker report by the Premier. So share with us, what's your takeaway?
Yes, thank you, Tindo. I think this year's two sections marks a new beginning of the second quarter of this century, and actually it has shifted also from 14th five-year plan to the 15th five-year plan, which is very significant because we know that from the last 14th five-year plan, China has already greatly upgraded on many fronts, green power, innovation, and all the consumption and all the driving of the economy. But this new five-year plan started with this year's two sections to be approved and implemented, is another shift in a new gear to a much higher objective. We used to have an Internet Plus and AI Plus. Now technology is going to be the driven and the core driver of a next five-year plan growth. And of course, on top of that, innovation and also AI and digital and green power. So this new quality productive forces is going to be the main push and pull factors for China to lift to another stage of the modernization drive. So I think this is very crucial. But also the timing is very important amidst the turmoil and uncertainty of the world. The government made a very pragmatic and realistic assessment of the GDP growth, 4.5 to 5%, as you mentioned, but also more importantly, this is going to consolidate the consensus, build up the new confidence, and also have a new marching order for the whole country to be more efficiently, effectively pushing ahead for the new five-year plan. But this year, I think it's already set a very good beginning. And with this Premier Li Qiang's report this morning, which I listened from beginning to the end, I think it's very encouraging, very stimulating, and also very targeted. So we are confident that this is going to be another success year for China.
Well, John in Kunshan, for those international viewers, with interest in the Chinese economic and social work, how would you explain to them, what's the major content, the gist of the government work report?
First, I think China is really to be congratulated on the quality and the inclusiveness and the well-structured process that leads to these five-year plans. That in itself is very impressive and something many countries could learn from. But in addition to that, I think that the main thrust here, as has been stated, is towards technology and innovation. Innovation is the key to productivity improvement. In every country in the world, that has been the case. But what impresses me is the determination, and I think it will be realized, for China to achieve technology innovation without losing its premier place in the world in manufacturing. So advanced manufacturing, intelligent manufacturing that keeps the core of high value added manufacturing very much in focus in China, as opposed to letting that slip away as other countries have done as they have advanced economically. I think that is a very impressive element of this promise in the plan.
We're joined in the studio. China plans, China delivers. I mean, that's impressive. If you look at the records, which is very solid of the economic growth in particular. For this year, the target is like 4.5% to 5%. So if you look at international media, they use these headlines like softer target, China cost target. China has the lowest economic target since 1991. Is it a slower economic growth or more or less the same? Because there's also one sentence that is, aim higher in practice, right?
Well, that's gibberish. I know that the 5% for last year is already a great achievement. China's economy is more and more becoming like a developed country economy. In other words,
mature economy.
Mature, yeah, much industrialized economy. For an economy like this, 5% growth is already something unheard of. I mean, what's the last time the United States got a 5% growth, right? Usually, for a developed economy, it's 3% is regarded as high growth.
It's a strong growth.
It's strong growth, yeah. Second thing I want to point out is that China's economy is already very large. We're talking about a $20 trillion economy. A 5% growth is $1 trillion, right? You're creating a new economy every year, essentially, on the size like Australia. It's a huge growth. So it's as China becomes more and more like a developed country, as China's economy keeps expanding, it's becoming increasingly difficult to keep the same pace of growth. So I think the idea that it's slowing down is something very natural. In economics, we have this theory called the convergence theory. In other words, different economies, they have different growth speeds. Developed economies tend to have a slower growth rate, and developing economies have a higher growth rate. Eventually, they're going to converge. So I think this is nothing unusual here. Now, the fact that they set the target for 4.5% to 5% is something quite new to me. I haven't seen a target range that large, right, in the past. I think there's a couple of reasons behind this. So one, of course, is the tremendous uncertainties. I think Huiyao mentioned the international environment. It's a tumultuous world right now, and we don't know about what's the impact on China's exports, for example, which recorded a 6% growth last year, which is tremendous. We don't know about energy supply reliability right now. So all these uncertainties, as well as domestic challenges, make it quite difficult to make a very precise, accurate point estimate. So that's why I think they entirely give up the idea of targeting, let's say, 4.5, 4.67. It doesn't make sense. I think it makes a lot of sense just to say, okay, we're going to target this range. Now, also, it's very important. There's actually another sentence behind that in President Premier Li's speech, right? He said that we'll try our best to achieve a higher end in this range. So I think, realistically, we're probably talking about something, like 4.7, 4.8, that kind of a range. I think that would be very reasonable to me.
Huiyao, what's your take? And of course, if you look at last year, 5%, despite all the challenges, like first quarter, second quarter, ups and downs there. Given this year, as the premier said, domestic challenge, international challenge, they are real and rising actually. But last year, one thing that's unexpected probably for a lot of people, that's a strong surge of export with a trade surplus of $1.2 trillion. What about export this year?
Well, I think that with given this what happened in the war in Iran and Israel-American attacks there, we're going to see that the falling out is still going to be seen because affect the Middle East and also this energy supply. But of course, China is much diversified. It's not really just depend on one country or one area. But why it's 4.5? I agree with John just mentioned because it's already set in the philosophy of Chinese 5 years plan now, from high speed to high quality. So high quality means you should not just look at all the officials get a new order, not just look at the target of the GDP as the only measure of the performance. We need to have a soft GDP now. We need to have a well-being of the people. We need to have the fine-tune all those quality and all those connections, all those improvement of livelihood of the people, Medicare, social security, and also seniors taking care. So I think that probably shows a paradigm shift that China just doesn't look at only at the GDP speed and the percentage, but also at the quality of that. So have a little slower down, which doesn't mean a bad thing, but it's still the highest among this kind of size of the magnitude of the economy like China and the U.S. So I think this soft GDP concept, which I think I call that a soft GDP, is basically we have a high quality development, and then we don't need really speed on this high percentage, which is have more satisfactory, more improvement of livelihood, and also which send a great signal to really look at the environment, have a much healthy and happier life. One of the things Premier mentioned this morning is that China going to hit 80 years of life expectancy, which is enormous, right? It's already better than the United States now, and double of that since China established 70 some years ago. So that's remarkable. Those are quality, high quality stuff.
Yeah, the life expectancy, 80 years old. I mean, 80 is a happy surprise because that's a comprehensive number, right? It represents probably better environment, better health, better Medicare, everything results in the increase of life expectancy. John in Kunshan, speak of this quality of life or quality of development. Premier Li says the government is determined to improve living standards and boost consumer spending. But of course, we mentioned a little bit about the challenge. One of the challenges is demographic gradually, decline, aging population, of course, lackluster property market. So what do you think the government can do probably to deal with those challenges and then increase consumption, increase the demand domestically?
Consumption really stems from two key drivers. One is confidence, and the other is choice. So if the government can bring more stability to the real estate sector, that will definitely underpin a restoration of confidence that will make people more comfortable consuming. The second thing is choice. More competition in any market usually results in more choice, and more choice typically results in more consumption. I would expect to see a much greater emphasis on service sector consumption than we have seen to date. That would certainly be in line with what we would expect for a developing economy, as in China at the moment. But one of the things I always like to underscore is that there's a difference between low quality consumption and high quality consumption. So I think China wants to emphasize high quality consumption in the sense of consumption that is responsible, consumption that is sustainable, consumption that is inclusive, rather than consumption that is wasteful and resource depleting. So not all consumption is created equal. Let me leave it at that.
John, can you talk more on that, like a service sector, more consumption in there, and also more examples on high quality or low versus low quality consumption, please?
Well, we would say that green-related products are better than non-green related products, to be succinct. So EVs vis-a-vis fossil fuel-driven vehicles, for example. But regarding services, and I think connecting it to your point regarding the aging of the population, there is going to be a tremendous opportunity for expansion and consumption in healthcare for senior citizens, particularly stay-at-home solutions as opposed to more expensive institutionalized solutions. And then in addition, I think when I travel around China, I see, an increasing number of groups of retired people exploring China in many cases for the first time. So there's a tremendous opportunity for domestic travel expansion, even beyond what we've seen in the last year. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we always have to be sensitive with respect to children, where there's a low birth rate. Every child is a valuable asset for this nation, and so no child should be left behind. And so services that ensure that each child maximizes their potential, whether they be in a rural area or in an urban area, services that help to do that will also be valued.
Mm-hmm. Well, good point, John. There, mentioned about like EV is preferred, obviously, to the legacy cars. I think in today's situation, probably it's more urgent in the sense, China is asking the public parking lot to meet the quota of like criteria of like 20%. Must be, the spaces for EVs, and also, with the energy crisis, related to the war on Iran, Probably more urgent.
John is a marketing professor, so he knows what's actually being desired these days in China. Nevertheless, I think, speaking of EV, I think looking back, China made really a good policy bet. Remember, when Chinese government started this EV initiative, there was a lot of controversy about this, right?
That's
whether
right.
this is the correct technology choice, whether it's indeed green technology, blah blah blah. Looking back, this is such a tremendous wise choice, right? So I think we're very lucky that indeed we have a very good industrial policy in place to drive the EV growth in China as well as around the world these days. Now, looking at the consumption, my view is that we are probably moving a little bit away from consumption of, in economics, we call them durable goods, like buying a car, moving to a new apartment, buying furniture, white appliances, stuff like that. We are moving more towards experience goods, the service you are calling for, right? You're calling things like travel, leisure, sports, music, entertainment, stuff like that. These are the the areas of consumption that the middle class would be enamored with, in my view. And also, I think for relatively well-off people here in China, we're talking about the frontiers of new consumption. Things like buying a yacht, for example, right? Things about buying a general aviation airplane. The frontiers, we're pushing the envelope, the frontiers of the new types of consumption. A little bit more expensive, just starting, pay attention to by Chinese consumers. All of these things, they represent the new technologies, right? So I think these areas is also something that the central government should provide incentives so that the relatively well-off people, the upper class of the middle class, I would say, or the fairly wealthy people, they should feel very comfortable to spend money on these things.
Right. You mentioned about this new technology. As earlier, we mentioned a little bit about policy-wise, China. Many people believe China will continue. You see the continuity from 14th Five-Year Plan to 15th Five-Year Plan with a similar focus on this high-tech sector, Huiyao, R&D investment in innovation and innovation-driven economy growth there. And of course, in the short term, basically China wants to build a new economy that is driven by technology, not by property development.
That's true.
That's right. And some would question, China is racing or is competing with the U.S. But personally, I think for any nation, they want to develop high tech. They want to say, if you can be in a leading position rather than being a follower, nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely nothing wrong, because I do think that some healthy competition would be really great for the mankind. And basically, I think that in the 19th century, UK British invented the steam power, right? Water invented locomotive, and then UK led the Industrial Revolution for the 19th century. And 20th century, Edison invented the electricity, and of course, they invented the internet and digital and the semiconductor, and the US led the 20th century. So the 21st century is not the green power, right? And then China is already accounts 70% of the global green power production, and 14th Five-Year Plan, China's green capacity raised from 40% to 60%. And we can imagine that maybe in the 15th Five-Year Plan, that's going to be the 80%. So that's enormous. And then that's a new paradigm, a new trend, transformation going on. So I think this is great. And who says only one country or two countries can monopolize technology development? I think China has the 1.4 billion people, largest application C of AI, and China's power of generation is 2.5 times of US, 3 times of Europe, has a large supply for the AI development, computing power. For example, Premier Li announced today at a Working Report, China already has 16 million EV cars produced last year, 20 million charging stations. It's far more than the rest of the world combined. So that's enormous. So those new model, new technology development, it's going to benefit the mankind, the whole world. So it's not say, I monopolize the technology, and you can only develop the low-end stuff. Now, if all the countries really display its competitive advantage, we're going to learn from each other, right? I mean, U.S. and Europe provide Boeing and Airbus. We're still flying largely on those things. But why not, ride on the Chinese EV cars? So Carney was great. I mean, Canada imported 49,000 Chinese EV car this year, so which is great. I think we should learn from each other, benefit from each other, and then we should not have the monopoly of the technology. Only if we develop technology, we're competing or take away other jobs. So that's another right thinking on that.
So John, here obviously this high-tech sector is the focus. Of course, you want to have a strong consumption domestically. At the same time, you don't want to be left behind in terms of high-tech sector development, especially for countries like China. I guess countries like the U.S., big powers there, they are aiming at the frontier technology. What are the focus of China in terms of frontier technology for the next 5 years?
Well, I think this is entirely driven by market competition. We have great Chinese companies, private companies, working feverishly on new innovations, cranking out new products, and these things are being sold not just in China but around the world. And the fact of the matter is, these products are very much in demand. If you think about it, I mean, no matter how much higher tariffs the United States have imposed, European Union has imposed, these products are still very popular. Look at the automobile sales in Europe, for example. I was told there's one Chinese company by the name of Chery Automobile. They built 5% of the market share in UK within 18 months, something that has never been seen before. The best record so far is Toyota. It took them 5 years to reach that kind of a market share. So I think as long as products are being very much in demand in these countries, I don't see what's wrong with China has a little bit larger share of the global market. Remember in 19th century when the UK was at the height of industrialization, they export products around the world. When some countries push back, what did they do? They sent a flotilla of battleships to the country, right? And they invaded China in the 1840s. We didn't do that, of course. We tried to convince their consumers, with better products, with a better value proposition. I think that's what's called competition. Competition has to be based on fair and square competition, not some government intervention that artificially and pushing back products from this country. You can't just put a name tag on this product and say, well, this is from not a democratic country or not from a friendly country. This is just not right, I would say.
Like globalization, though, free trade benefits everyone. John in Kunshan, if you look at the Chinese innovation, Chinese market economy, playing a role in boosting the innovation. In the past, few years, there's a lot of talk of to solve this choke point technology, like U.S. export restriction of advanced semiconductors. But for this year or next 5 years, what will be the focus in terms of the frontier technology? Is there something like, say, can we look at China going beyond solving choke points and probably being in a leading position in the new technologies?
When a country is under pressure commercially, the natural inclination, of course, is to set up tariffs, to restrict imports via quotas and so forth. But as John has said, this is just to deprive the consumers of that country of the opportunity to choose a better value product from outside. When we're dealing with choke points, typically those who are affected by choke points double down on innovation to circumvent the choke point. And so in a way, putting the choke point in place actually becomes an incentive to develop domestic industry that means the country is no longer relying on imports from elsewhere in order to meet demand. And you can see this happening on the other side of the coin in the US. They're investing like crazy around the world in rare earth minerals, production in particular. And in the same way, I'm sure China is sensibly doubling down on semiconductor development. to circumvent those restrictions that are in place as a result of leadership that the US may at the moment have in advanced chip technology. So in the end, these choke points actually are a spur to additional innovation, and additional innovation in the end always benefits the consumers around the world.
Will benefit the consumers around the world. Huiyao, lastly, if you look at the past development, China is basically developing on the shoulders of like say other giants, But people would say for the next 5 years, the determination is like in some areas probably you need to start from the scratch, originality, foundational science, investment in those areas. Are you confident with that we are going to make some breakthrough in some areas?
Well, I'm quite certain. I think that China has taken a long time since it opened up 48 years ago, and China the mindset has already changed. And now, particularly in the last 14th five-year plan, I think Chinese industry and Chinese company in general has been greatly encouraged by this green power globalization that China is leading now. And then, they are so actually the big boost confidence that, okay, Chinese company can also do that. So I think that's really a great thing that in the front area that what are the new technology that China can really produce. I think China can really produce a new synergy, synchronizing power, so to speak, synchronized industrial power. For example, China has 70% of global speed railway, 5 million of 5G stations, largest in the world, 7 largest container ports in the world, and also 30 million college graduates every year. And of course, on top of that, you have 1.2 billion smartphone users. So those are going to produce so much application scenes. And plus China AI has such huge power to support the AI development and cloud computing and quantum computing and all those things. China, with this large application scene, 1.4 billion people, open AI system like DeepSeek, and with the robots everywhere. So I think China is going to probably produce some new phenomena and new miracles and new technology that is going to coming up to benefit the world.
Well, there's a lot to look forward to in the next few years, obviously. On that, we come to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.